So welcome to Clear Mountain Wednesday. We are very happy today to have Rick Hanson join us. Rick, thank you so much for joining us.
It's truly an honor and a blessing. I feel so grateful to be invited. Thank you.
Yeah, we feel the same way. I'll just read a quick bio for anyone who doesn't yet know you. So Rick Hanson, PhD, is a psychologist, a senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, and a New York Times bestselling author. His books include Making Great Relationships, Neurodharma, Resilient, Hardwiring Happiness, Just One Thing, and Buddha's Brain, with over 1 million copies in English alone. He's founder of the Global Compassion Coalition and the Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, as well as the co-host with his son, Forrest Hanson, of Being Well podcast, which I've listened to a number of episodes of, and it's fun and enjoyable, really sweet and informative podcast. He's lectured at NASA, Google, Oxford, and Harvard, an expert on positive neuroplasticity. His work has been featured on CBS, NPR, the BBC, and other major media. He began meditating in 1974 and is taught in meditation centers worldwide. So, Rick, I thought to maybe just bring us to one of your books that I just finished reading today is the Neurodharma. Could you explain what you mean by that term and maybe what brings you to your interest and expertise in the neuro and the Dharma aspect of that?
Well, I imagine that for listeners or watchers of this conversation, the Dharma part is pretty straightforward. In other words, broadly, the teachings of the Buddha that explain the skillful means that lead away from suffering and toward happiness, love, and liberation, broadly. The neuro part refers to the fact that over the last 100 or so years, especially the last 10 or 20 years, humanity has acquired a lot of knowledge about the underlying causes and conditions in the body, embedded in life altogether, that are a major, if not an entire basis for the mental causes and conditions that the Buddha and his successors, including yourselves, address to reduce suffering and lead onward to happiness, love, and liberation. And so, to me, Neurodharma is a way to respectfully move back and forth in the spirit of the Buddhist tradition and certainly the scientific tradition, and I kind of stand in both of those, in which ignorance is seen as a fundamental root of suffering. And there's a pragmatic interest in recognizing what is true and then applying it for the welfare of all beings. And so in Neurodharma, we go back and forth between what's happening in the mind related to plausibly what could be simultaneously happening in the body, especially the brain, in a way that then enables us to sharpen our insights and individualize our practice and even draw upon or emphasize in particular certain kinds of skillful means that use the mind to change the brain, to change the mind in turn for one's own benefit and that of other beings. That's the fundamental frame here. And to me, it's in the spirit that recognizes that the Buddha did not need an MRI. You all clearly deep in practice, I could tell already, probably have never had an EEG of your brain and so forth. So it's not like we need this stuff. And I think it's important to have respect for mystery. I myself am very grounded in the Buddha's teachings about unconditionality and the ultimate, mysterious, unconditioned, timeless ground of all. Still, there's a lot that we do know. And why not use it if it's useful? And then, ehe passiko, see for yourself if it holds up over time with the ring of truth and is personally useful for you and for others. So that's the spirit here.
Thank you, Rick. And hopefully we'll get to dive into that whole unconditioned thing in a bit. But before that, in terms of the usefulness or utility of bringing together these two fields, as a practitioner who is familiar with the Buddhist teachings, what are some of the 2 or 3 really key insights that you feel neuroscience has been able to offer practitioners, either novel insights into how they can train happiness or sharpening those tools that the Buddha gave us? What are some gems for us from that field?
Great question. Yeah. Well, before getting to insights that are practical, I think there are two preliminary benefits that are worth calling out. One is that if we acknowledge that whatever's happening in the mind, let's say, of someone in a forest refuge or in a Zen center or doing Tibetan practices, or even more broadly, is, whatever's happening there is connected to underlying, still often mysterious, but nonetheless increasingly well understood physical processes, biological, neural processes, and even more broadly, a Sufi, a rabbi in prayer, a Christian, an atheist doing secular humanism and ethics, whatever, recognizing that we all share a common human body gives us a common frame for appreciating and starting to understand what's actually happening, and starting to recognize that sometimes people are using very different ways of speaking, which I also want to include the indigenous traditions around the world that have and had profound contemplative traditions of their own. People may be using very exotically different terminology that points at the same thing, or sometimes they're using the same word that describe really different physical processes. So it gives you a common frame for those who care about that sort of thing. Second, really useful, it's highly motivating. When people get that ruminating about afflictive thoughts and feelings and just marinating and all that is bad for your brain. That's kind of motivating. Also, if you help people appreciate that there's a lot of evidence now that their practice is gradually actually changing their body. It's actually changing, it's remodeling their own brain. Whoa, that's motivating. So that's the second benefit. So then in terms of insights, one of the things that I think really happens as you learn more about what's happening under the hood is you find ways of prioritizing practices that some smart Roshi or abbot or bhikkhuni or bhikkhu has thought of a long time ago elsewhere, but they're just kind of lost in the 10,000 tools in the psychospiritual warehouse. But when you understand what's happening in your brain, you realize, wow, that's really important. So I think there's an importance in being modest and not slapping, old wine into new bottles and then going on television proclaiming that you've discovered it. No. Somebody else told people to do that too because it worked a long time ago, let's say. But still, you can call it out. So for me, there's several examples of that. One is the deep importance of absorption practice. Not in addition to formal absorption practices, like in the right concentration or wise concentration element of the Eightfold Path, moving even further into the formalist realms and just absorption for a few breaths in a row while experiencing something beneficial. Some relaxation, some sense of your own worth, some opening in the heart. That absorption, relatively briefly, maybe we'll distinguish between capital A absorption states and lowercase a absorption, that fosters the internalization of the experience you're having at the time in lasting neural structure. To me, the point of practice a lot is growing the good that lasts inside. It's super. The line, think you're enlightened, go home for the holidays, right? It's what lasts inside that matters. Well, what lasts inside is based on changes in your body, unless you're calling out supernatural woo-woo factors, which I believe in. I think that's cool stuff, but most of it, if not all of it, involves changing your brain for the better. Major way to do that is to take in the good. I've written a lot about that, positive neuroplasticity. That's absorption. Now, a lot of people have talked about absorption, and probably somewhat wise teachers emphasize resting in. The teaching, better than I, that your mind takes its shape from what it repeatedly rests upon. And it becomes the habit of your own heart. And we were talking before we started on the well-being cascade that you talk about. So there's an encouragement for people pragmatically to stay with things. But on the other hand, to build on that, I think we would also serve our students and ourselves if we taught more specifically how to take in the good and draw on, evidence-based scientifically, but also personally evidence-based because they work, ways of heightening the internalization of beneficial states of mind, such as, for example, really enjoying them or recognizing their personal relevance. So that would be, I think, something that's really highlighted. Also, we're familiar with teachings about anatta, including applied to, the deconstructing of all experiences, so that we hold them more lightly, we're less attached to them. That undermines, tanha, craving. Okay. Well, when you start to realize that right now, the thoughts we're having, the images that are coming up, the body sensations, all that is being constructed by what Charles Sherrington called the enchanted loom of the brain, weaving the tapestry of consciousness. It's being constructed by these super fast, gushy, gooey, mindless, selfless, tiny synapses that are so small you could put several thousand in the width of a single hair, with pulses of activity rippling through those tiny spaces many times a second, coordinated with millions, even billions of other synaptic processes. And that dynamism is the basis of these experiences we take so seriously and cherish and try to possess as our own. In other words, a deep understanding of the embodied construction of the mind really aids nibbida, disenchantment, selflessness, and release, not in a way, and also, to me, pragmatically, it really feeds a sense of awestruck gratitude at the profound gift that was handed to each of us when we were conceived. We never earned it. The build-out instructions for a human body and brain. And so, in a funny kind of way, appreciating the complexity and dynamism and selflessness of it all brings you into appreciation about it and a sense of responsibility. This your one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver puts it, has been handed to you. What will you make of this phenomenal gift? And I think that's extremely in the spirit of the Dharma. I know I could give more examples pulled from Neurodharma, et cetera, but I'll just stop at those two.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we'll definitely want to go more into small a and big A absorption. But before getting that quote that you spoke of, the whatever one thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of your mind. That's from the Majjhima Nikaya number 19. And Neurodharma, your book, is just wonderfully sprinkled with quotes from the Majjhima Nikaya and from other books of the Pali Canon.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned in an interview, or maybe speaking with Forrest, that you had done a year and a half long Majjhima Express study. And we're currently going through a 3-year long Mission Majjhima.
I saw that. Yeah, 1 week per sutta. Yeah,
that's right. 152 weeks.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, what specific teachings maybe, or how has that study of the Majjhima Nikaya, or Majjhima Nikaya specifically, or just the Pali Canon as a whole, influenced your work as a psychologist and in neuroscience?
Well, yes, it was one of the coolest things I've done, which was take a ride on the Majjhima Express. And I want to call out Matthew Grad, who some of the people in your neck of the woods may know. Beautiful Ruby Grad, I think, wife. Yeah. Major spirit rock figures. I was on the board with them for quite a while there, back in the old days. I think the aughts, maybe the 90s, something. Anyway, so yay, Matthew. He had the audacity to take us on the Majjhima Express. Well, assuming people know what this is, essentially these are surviving written records of the Buddha's teachings and those of some other people around him that were transmitted orally for centuries, and then surviving written records have persisted to this day, such as in the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya. And first, for me, it's just haunting to hear the words of the Buddha and to feel his energy coming to us.
Mhm.
Imperfectly, you can recognize a certain amount of editing from abbots who are trying to get their male monastics to cut it out, settle down. There's a certain amount of that coming through, but still, you can feel you're there in the forest. You're there and it's coming through. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's very touching. I would say sections of the Majjhima that I particularly like, I think they're in the Majjhima. I especially appreciate, many great translators, certainly Bhikkhu Bodhi among them, who I just profoundly respect and appreciate, including for his work with social justice and Buddhist global relief. He's a supporter of the Global Compassion Coalition as well, for which I'm very grateful. Anyway, the description of the Buddha's own path, his own journey to awakening, and you really feel he's telling you, his voice really comes through there when he's talking about that. Passages from that have a lot of import for me as a psychologist, such as, quote, painful, racking feelings arose, et cetera, but they did not invade my mind and remain. People in my much more quite secular online, wide open to a lot of people program on Wednesdays, which is now guest taught by somebody else tonight. People who have no background whatsoever with Buddha Dharma can really understand the difference between, painful anxiety, sorrow, anger, hurt, shame, flow through awareness, but they need not invade us and remain. They know what that is. They feel that. So that would be an example of some very pointed teachings there. Then another thing I really want to call out, and this is a growing edge for me. For a long time, I presumed that the appropriate translation of dukkha was straight up suffering. So First Noble Truth, we're stuck with suffering. Suffering arises, and all that arises because of tanha. So then we want the cessation of tanha and dukkha, and we get through the Eightfold Path. Well, recently, I've come across good translations that really identify dukkha as having these three qualities. This is really sounds kind of technical, and but it has huge implications. So if it's okay, you'll bear with me. Yeah, and I wrote about this in a way in the section in the chapter on fullness, chapter 5 in Neurodharma, is life suffering, ? So you see routinely life is suffering, so forth, which is used to motivate a kind of grim, world-denying, escapist attitude, which frankly has characterized a fair amount of the Theravadan tradition, and which the Mahayana was a kind of rebuke for, and Reformation. And one thing I really appreciate about your approach is you don't have that kind of grim, oh man, life sucks. Then you die and you got to rinse and repeat. Great. Till you're an arhat. Great. Good luck with that. Okay. I'll cut to the chase. Dukkha, as I understand it, involves three things. Dukkha involves three things. One, there are sometimes unpleasant experiences that are inescapable. Okay, first starts. Second, all pleasant experiences end. All that arises as the characteristic of anicca and passing away. And third, all experiences are empty. They are made of parts that are connected and changing, and therefore incapable of being possessed and being a lasting, permanent source. No single experience can be a lasting source of happiness. That's dukkha. There's no end to dukkha. After awakening, there's still dukkha. The Buddha faced dukkha. He lost friends or he had back pain. It hurt, right? His pleasant experiences, even beautiful third jhana absorption experiences, eventually changed, right? And all experiences inherently, including his own, have the characteristic of emptiness, with all the implications of that. There's no end to dukkha, but there can be an end to suffering when there's an end to tanha, craving, drivenness, contraction, which is deeply biological. We evolved to get better and better at craving because our ancestors who were marginally better at craving were more able to pass on genes that passed on genes, right? And so here we are today, a lot swimming against the stream of our own certain biological tendencies. So for me, the joy and why in part, I think the Buddha was the happy one is that we're stuck with dukkha, but we're not stuck with suffering, right? And and therefore the magic of life and the training process is to get better at managing dukkha without tanha. Dukkha without tanha is upekkha, is equanimity. Dukkha plus tanha, that's definitely suffering. And so we train and in our growing capacity to be with dukkha in all its forms without the various other factors that turn it into suffering. And my 2 cents actually are that there's certain lapses that I've experienced, in Western Buddhism, certainly in the more secular aspects of it. One, not enough emphasis on awakening as the ultimate aim and possibility, the heartwood of practice, which I find condescending to not really name the ultimate aim of the journey and the possibility, even if we're not going to go all the way. Second, the essentially teaching Buddhism as a 7-fold path and leaving out right concentration in the jhanas. Like, to me, again, that's condescending to think that people can't handle those teachings. And then last, I don't think there's enough of a focus on craving, on tanha, straight up, including its embodied biological roots. Okay. Wow, I just really blasted that out there.
This is wonderful, Rick.
I'm going to shut up now.
No, thank you. This is perfect. And it's so interesting hearing you speak from a perspective deeply grounded in the science and the biology, and with such respect and acknowledgement of the limits of that realm, and kind of circling around perhaps something more. And just to kind of motion towards that, and I think these are related questions, is you speak about how absorption initiates like gamma frequency in the brain and dopamine with the piti and sukha, all these things. But in your conception, would the mind of an arahant, is there a transcendent element beyond just the neurological changes? And I think this ties into, how do you balance this role as a scientist strictly grounded in the neurology of the brain, and a practitioner with deep reverence for these texts and perhaps something pointed to beyond that realm? I'm really curious how you hold those two perspectives.
Well, I feel respectful and grateful that you're naming that. And the passages, so one thing I did in Neurodharma, is that I pulled out of Bhikkhu Bodhi's anthology of the Buddha's greatest hits. I have it here. It's extremely well thumbed. I should fish it out. I know it's around here somewhere.
I think it's at the
in
top
the Buddha's
of your
words,
Rick's
I think.
Picks list. Yeah.
What?
It's at the top of your Rick's Picks list.
Oh, yeah, it should be. So I pulled out all of his references. I went in the index and I pulled out all of his descriptions of nirvana, the deathless. And it just goes on and on and on. It's so inspiring. And also, I'm reminded of, I believe, the book The Island from Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Pasano, and the lineage you two bhikkhus sit and stand, descriptions of what is actually possible. So very briefly, we start with our mind. We are having experiences. There is hearing, there is seeing, there is remembering, there is sorrow, there is joy, there is tanha, there is thirst, there is dukkha, there is the passing away of things we like, all that, from which we infer that there's real stuff out there. There's a material world. So we start with experiences from which we infer that there are rocks, there is water, there are galaxies, there are microbes, there are bones, etc. People philosophically might be pure idealists and might dispute whether or not there is materiality, rupa as well as nama. But I think there is. That's my ontology of reality. Nama and rupa, mind and matter. Bingo. Now we're okay. The Buddha, 99% operated at this level in terms of his teachings, his counsel, the practices, and the Satipatthana and related suttas. Big tip of the hat here to Analayo, and I consider his book Satipatthana. I recommend it to secular people because it's so great as a owner's manual, and very inspiring path of practice. Okay, so that's where the Buddha stayed, and that's entirely where the scientific enterprise lives.
What you call the natural frame.
Exactly right. Mind and matter. There is information. Somehow, the function of the nervous system is to process information somehow in ways that are not yet fully, established. And I think it could be centuries before they are. But somehow the information flowing through the nervous system enables the experiences that squirrels, humans, my wife and I rescued a spider a few minutes before we started here. I think that spider was having its own experiences with, a honeybee has 1 million neurons. That honeybee is pretty smart. It's got visual processing, it learns things, it communicates, let alone us, with 85 billion neurons. Okay, so mind and matter. Is there something more? People like Stephen Batchelor, who I respect immensely, might say, well, we don't know. There might be, but because we can't know, it's irrelevant to practice. And there are a lot of pitfalls in getting, interested in it. Okay. Other people, like I think the Buddha himself, and certainly Bhikkhu Bodhi, I believe, and numerous other people just say, well, the Buddha clearly was pointing to that which is not subject to arising and passing away, distinct from most everything in the Big Bang universe, which is subject to arising and passing away. It has to be meaningfully distinct. Okay, if there is such a thing. And then we have other, I'll call them certainly religions, and many other people who matter-of-factly, whether you call it God in a kind of, the Abrahamic Bible, that Jewish, Christian, Muslim, that thread through there, or whether you use other ways, people are pointing to that. So either there is or there isn't. I call it unconditionality to avoid, as you used the word there earlier, Ajahn Nisabo thing. I know you were being playful and you really understood what you were doing. Yeah, we're not thingifying it. Unconditionality, timelessness. And so all that said, to me, the Buddha was absolutely pointing to that. And it's of great interest to me what happens when people go through cessation and nibbana. And, I speculated neurologically, I think plausibly about that, and why it would matter, right? And more broadly, for me, one of the fundamental purposes of practice is to become more accessible to the divine, the unconditioned, whatever you want to call it, the ground of all, which minimally has unconditionality as a property, and perhaps awareness of some kind, and love. But the Buddha kind of left it as not this, not that, unconditioned, right? So for me, it's actually really central in practice that as we clear away our afflictions and become more grounded in a sense of oneness with everything, Zen is particularly, and Chan, strong in that department, with also a growing sense that all that is arising and passing away is occurring in this unconditioned ground, that time is proceeding in timelessness. That for me is a major aim of practice, and has been a beautiful, beautiful development. And to be honest with you all, I've been honest so far too, but the U2 song, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For.
I know that song.
They're quite, they're Christian, 3 out of 4 of them in their own quiet way, the 4 members of the band. And I feel I've found what I'm looking for, what I've been looking for. And now it's a process of deepening the ongoingness of that, and the giving over to it, being lived by. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And I think of this as deeply Buddhist.
Mm-hmm. It is. You speak of three ways of engaging with the unconditioned, and the third one of which is this truly transcendent, outside of the natural frame.
Yeah, that's right.
But you also speak of two other ways of engaging, which I think are helpful. There's this practice of upasamanusati, recollection of peace, or recollection of nibbana even.
Right.
And these two other ways of engaging with the unconditioned are as if, or ineffectual, or like as if. Could you speak about those?
Oh, that's very interesting. I'm so glad you actually honored me with a close reading of that book. So there are many things that are like the unconditioned, or which have an unconditioned quality. Awareness, which is one reason I think people have sometimes conflated awareness, which in the aggregates arises dependently, right? Have conflated awareness with unconditionality. Ultimately, that said, even if unconditionality itself has a property of a kind of cosmic consciousness, okay, but awareness is an open field. It can represent anything, right? Human awareness is the result of all kinds of conditioned factors, but inside that frame, it can have anything. It can represent anything. A blank sheet of paper, oh, my yellow pad, whatever, my prop here. It itself is effectively unconditioned. So I think it's helpful for people to, as kind of an approach, a respectful one that tracks the difference between what is like the divine. I'll use that word. The Buddha never would, or didn't, as far as we know. That which is like unconditioned. What's the word in Pali for unconditioned?
Asankata.
Okay, I'm gonna asankata. Oh, asankata. Got it. Yeah. Not compounded, right?
Not compounded.
Yeah, asankata. Great. I should have known that. Thank you, teachers. I love it. Okay. What is like a sankata is not itself a sankata. Okay. But as we have a sense of opening that can include anything, awareness opening, as we have a sense even visually of the field widening to include anything, as we're drawn into vastness is like the vastness within the natural frame, within the Big Bang universe, is like infinite vastness, unbounded, endless, edgeless vastness in asankata. And these draw our heart in that direction. You may know it's really sweet. There's a thing called something theology, partly developed by Alfred North Whitehead, et cetera. Yeah. Then talk about he thinks of it as God, but we could also say the ground, or timelessness, or asankata, luring us, drawing us toward it. And thus, consistent with what you've said earlier, the mind takes its shape from what it rests upon. If we can rest upon that which is like asankata, I think those qualities start to become more present in our own life, and we become more accessible to them from actual asankata.
Process theology.
Process theology, that was it. Yeah.
I was quoting you. So.
Oh, good. Oh, there you are. I forgot what I said. Yeah, not to overdo it, and even also I got very interested in writing the book in the frequency in which there's teaching in the Pali Canon, which I'm more centered in than Tibetan or Zen or Pure Land, those forms. Although I've lately, I would say, on a fairly well-developed Theravada trunk, I've been branching into the Mahayana. I hope I don't lose my Theravada card, my membership card, in good standing. Anyway, gosh, I lost my thread there. It'll come back to me. I'm having too much fun somehow. Nope, gone. Who cares? She'll come back.
Well, let me take you on a different tangent there than Rick, and we'll open up. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. We'll begin asking those soon. But I did want to. This is a different angle, but I am really curious. You wrote "Making Great Relationships," about 50 ways of kind of cultivating a healthy relationship, and I mean that is such a realm of learning and dukkha and sukha, and what are kind of the lasting peak or most salient insights that you took from that writing? For, we have a lot of practitioners in relationship, with often people who don't understand their practice and trying to navigate that, or sometimes in relationship as well, with people who are practitioners. But what kind of, are there any really pieces of that book that you've taken with you in the years since that have just kept on resonating that you could share with us?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. One is the simple power of speaking from the heart, and how scary it is, and how important. There's the simplicity of one of the structural forms of that is found in nonviolent communication, which is essentially saying, when X happens, described objectively, I feel Y, describe pretty emotions, because I need Z, because I have a universal human need. And that's a very powerful way to communicate, and one that really deepens our own practice and has the best odds chance of really working. A second thing that has really been there for me is to appreciate that everybody has a secret struggle. The people walking past you, including in their three-piece suits, or holding out a cup because they need food, they have their own life, their own inner world. And one of the things that's in short supply, paradoxically, the more that we're connected through Facebook and social media and global communications, one thing that's in short supply is deep listening and just simple presence with another person, to receive them and have the respect and the dignity yourself to be open to them, to listen, to be present to the being behind their eyes, behind the words. So that's the second thing that has really stood out. And the third thing is the importance of the combination of compassion and assertiveness, the strong heart, to be able to do both. It's fairly straightforward to be loving. It's fairly straightforward to be assertive. It may not be easy, but it's straightforward. The combination of the two can really quite powerful. And I think for people to realize there are ways to negotiate their issues with other people, set their boundaries, and to find that middle path, that middle way in which they're neither a doormat nor a bully. Gil Fronsdal said a lovely thing to me a long time ago, one of the teachers in our tradition, south of San Francisco. He said, we can put people out of, and he had kind of a list, out of our business, out of our bedroom, out of our White House, but we need not put them out of our heart. We need not, and that for me is kind of a standard there. Do you need to put them out of your heart, right? And how can we communicate with people in clear, firm ways, grounded in our own morality and our own sila, which includes preventing harms to others, without putting that person out of our heart. So that, those three, I think, come right out.
Well, in terms of deep presence and training in the capacity of an open heart, I did want to come back to those small a and large a absorption. And I'm curious, you have spoken in some talks about your own experience practicing with the jhanas, and with your background in neuroscience, I'm curious, where are we right now in terms of being able to figure out the neural correlates for the different jhana factors of joy, rapture, pleasure, directed thought, evaluation, singleness?
Yeah. That's a great question. One that interests me a lot. So I think that vitaka and vichara, applying attention, people translate that, as you would well know, differently, but applying and then sustaining attention, that's quite straightforward. And I'm using the word attention here rather than more broadly applied and sustained thought, which could all kinds of stuff bubbling around. For me, it was extremely helpful, at least pragmatically, and I think it would be consistent with these as jhana factors to be thinking of them as the usefulness of applying attention to the absorption object and then sustaining attention to it. The neurology of that's quite well understood at this point, broadly. There's a lot of work that's been done on attention and also what dysregulates attention, including in, people who are more spirited by temperament, let alone people who've been traumatized or, are really very distractible. So that's pretty straightforward. Singleness, which interests me, wow. Like that ekagata.
Yep.
Wow. Now that's really interesting. What's going on in ekagata? And I think there too, there is a growing clarity about what's happening in the brain when, and again, people talk about ekagata differently and maybe they experience it differently, when there is this sense of complete integration, wholeness, unification of consciousness, and which has an increasingly effortless quality about it, or sort of has its own momentum. I'm seeing you nod, so I'm looking at you as people who've trained a lot in these territory. There too, there's kind of a growing sense of, okay, and I wrote a bit about it, right hemisphere involvement, this very global language is dropping out, much less left hemisphere for right-handed people. Activity is dropping out in that unification. Top-down directedness of attention, which you have in more, vitaka and vichara applied and sustained, it starts getting quieter. You've just kind of landed there, right? So that's kind of getting clearer, if you will. Piti and sukha, quite a lot of stuff about, we'll call it happiness. Christina Feldman, to me, helpfully in my practice, describes sukha as a range from happiness to contentment to tranquility. And the calling out of contentment, I thought, was really helpful, and the softness of it. And as you know, the sukha is involved in the root of the word for sucrose and sugar in Sanskrit, so there's a sweetness in it. But piti, what the heck? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I think people make up stories like it's, some burst of natural opioids, or you might partake of some of the qualities, post-orgasmic, or, whatever, something like that. I don't know. I really don't know what's going on when we're just awash in that rapture and bliss, and you can hardly get out of your chair, and after a while it becomes overwhelming almost. But it works. I mean, it's happening. And then you go into the jhanas, and I know we did a study through our Wellspring Institute. You can find it at our institute, where Lee Brasington, people, again, there's a difference of views about, as you know, what is a jhana, and including, do you need to lose consciousness of your surround for a real jhana? Different views about that. But let's say, so you have Lee Brasington and people from the Wellspring Institute, notably Michael Haggerty, who's an academic, hooked Lee up and said, okay, Lee, on command, can you move through the jhanas? And Lee says, yeah, I can do that. And the patterning in his own brain tracked the transitions from the first to the second to the third to the fourth jhana.
Looking at the left-right ekagata correlate, or what was...
Or when he said he transitioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
He's
Like
saying
again,
that-
this might be way inside baseball or inside Buddha or something, but on the other hand, this sort of stuff can be really interesting. So as you again well know, and people can read the description of the jhanas. So transition. So um, I would say when he went into the first jhana from memory, I think there was a fair stability in his overall EEG readout. Like it wasn't changing much. Like, and that's you know, when you're in that jhana, there's not much noise going on. It's just there you are. Okay. But still, a certain amount of frontal lobe, top down executive direction of attention, because Vitaka and Vitara are still present in the first jhana, but they fade in the second, right?
Mhm.
And in the second, the activity in those regions of the brain that are anterior cingulate cortex and so forth, that are more involved in top-down regulation of attention, they went increasingly offline, in effect. That seemed pretty consistent. And then there were some subtle findings that kind of, sort of, plausibly, I think would make sense. Maybe in the parietal lobes in the rear, where there's this establishing of the dualism, the body world separation that started to fade. Kind of makes sense. I mean, we're on the frontier. This is like biology in 1650, soon after the invention of the microscope, 1650. And just think, whoop, how far we are today still. But what's cool about it is we're all pioneers in this territory ourselves.
No, we find this intersection fascinating, and just interviewed Jonas Mago about 3 weeks ago about the neuroscience research around jhana. And Rick, we do want to have a chance to take some questions from the audience here. So let me move to those.
As you do that, I fully want to acknowledge there are people who are really studying this increasingly in very neat ways. Shinzen Young has been very much in the forefront of this kind of research, and others, and I think great. So I want to acknowledge there are people who do bench science. I'm an applier. I'm an integrator and an applier. But I fully want to respect the people that are doing the cutting edge neuroscience work, as well as you all in a long tradition of contemplative practice.
Thank you, Rick. And yeah, maybe we'll get some of those names so we can have them on at some point as well.
Yeah.
So Julie asks, hi, Rick. I'm a 62-year-old practitioner who comes from a family where everyone on my father's side succumbs to dementia by their 60s and early 70s, including my 60-year-old sister.
Yeah.
All sides of my family also suffer from depression. I bought Neurodharma, but would also appreciate your thoughts on best practice on how I might improve my chances of being a kinder person if I should lose my ability to think clearly before I pass.
Well, Julie, first from my heart, I really feel for you. And I appreciate your courage in just being forthright about this. You're helping and serving people. I mean, I will carry you with me. This is really real. Let's see here. So dementia and contemplative practice, right? It's an area of a lot of interest in research and practical interest, because I think my friend Rick Mendias, who helped me with Buddha's Brain, he's a neurologist, mentioned some time ago that after 80, some very large fraction of the population, quarter or a third or more, are dealing with real dementia, not just ordinary cognitive decline due to aging. So it's many of us are interested in this topic, me included. So broadly, stress is bad for the brain. And the stress that understandably could arise as we contemplate our own future and the fear around it, let's say, and perhaps the anger at people in the medical system that are not really very helpful, and friends who don't really understand, that's not so good for the brain. So one of the most important things to do is to really double down on your practices. I mean, seek guidance from wise beings and teachers, like the two Ajahns here. Whatever's appropriate for you. Read the Well-Being Cascade. I just advised a client of mine earlier today who's dealt with a lot of stress in her lifespan. We accumulate wear and tear from past stress. To marinate in well-being as one of my two major prescriptions for her, even before I read the Well-Being Cascade here from our friends. So really take that on, and that means sometimes shedding stuff. Like I have a background in wilderness, and it's one thing to jog along the beach at sea level with a 20-pound rock in your backpack. You could probably do that. But at 20,000 feet, clawing your way uphill, bringing others along, you can't afford it. I joke with people that they ought to tattoo NMP, especially women who are socialized in a way that's relevant here. Tattoo NMP behind their eyelid, not my problem. Shed. So, the teachings of equanimity and sukha, the joyfulness, teachings, tranquility as a factor of awakening, those really sweet, nurturing, marinating in the gushy goodness. That is medicine for your brain, therapeutic medicine for your brain. So that's really important. And here's where I can't speak from expertise about the research, but I can speak from anecdotes, and to me, what's very, very plausible. To your question of how can I preserve kindness? How can you preserve your bodhicitta if cognitive function gradually declines? And one, it's to not add new wear and tear and new sensitization of the more negative emotionality systems in the brain, involving, let's say, the amygdala, which gets sensitized by cortisol. So, a lot of practice really is kind of simple. Less bad, more good. Day by day, breath by breath. What's on your list? What you're setting and what are you trying to grow? Did it. And so I think that's really useful. Marinating in this is really useful. And then from a neurological standpoint, what does dementia attack? It attacks memory function for the formation of new memory, and it gradually starts to attack prefrontal cortical functions around cognition and planning and even eventually language. But it tends to not attack the subcortical, more ancient, evolving starting around 200 million years ago, subcortical systems that are sort of the limbic system in your brain, the emotional centers that establish mood and heartfeltness. And so as we train in cultivating traits of open-heartedness, metta, karuna, kindness, compassion, joy for others, a fundamental sweetness. I had a teacher who described it as a blessing disposition. And we move, that's our orientation to the next moment, the next being. As we cultivate that in us, the underlying machinery of that, if you will, the biological machinery of that is conserved largely during dementia. And so even if a person may forget the name of a niece or nephew coming to visit, the lovingness that has been cultivated in the heart will still persist.
That's my plan. Yeah, just get all sweet and forget everybody's names. So,
I'm already forgetting their names, so I might as well be sweet.
Well, one last question before we go over to Zoom. But the last question was about basically meditation in the brain, and this is more about the body. Would you know if there's any work done on the beneficial states of mind having an effect on other body parts, such as the heart, lungs, hormonal states, etc.?
Oh, huge body of work on both less bad, more good. So chronic stress, which relates to, of course, states of mind and brain together, mind-brain together, is really bad for the immune system, digestive system. It dysregulates hormones, cardiovascular system. One of the major predictors of heart attack is the combination of a type A hard charging personality with hostility toward others, right? Hard charging alone could be super enthusiastic, yay, or it could be, hostility alone, but you're kind of a couch potato. You might avoid a heart attack, but the two together, not good. So that less bad. Now the more good. It's really interesting that if you look at the work of Barbara Fredrickson, who was very brave as a young female academic to study emotionally positive experiences and their benefits. Lots of actual evidence, for example, that happiness itself adds on average about 6 months, at least a few months to the lifespan. And there's a circular process here that as people who are healthier, that's a factor of happiness. But statistically, they can tease apart happiness itself. Ooh, that's kind of cool. 3-6 more months to chill with the grandkids, with the great grandkids, or to see how the world keeps turning out, even if it's wacky. That's pretty good. So that's a good thing. Also, interestingly, little details that emotionally positive experience, particularly social. Oh, I want to add that as a very important factor for dementia. The social support and loving experiences with other people. Well, emotionally positive experiences that are interpersonal and social protect the telomeres. These are kind of caps on the ends of our chromosomes that shorten with aging, and the shortening is correlated with diseases of age. So if we protect our telomeres, we reduce transcription errors, as cells divide and copy and so forth. And so we do better over time. That's another piece of evidence for all that. Also, then the last thing I'll just say is some of the causal loops will go from mind-brain to behavior to events in the world back into mind-brain into your body, or just directly into your body. In other words, if a person is cultivating a more cheerful disposition, less grouchy, less bad, more cheerful, they're probably going to have more people who stick around in their life and participate with them, who will help them drive to the doctor and not wait for a medical appointment until you've got to go to the ER, things like that. So the pathways can be complicated, but one of the, to me, fundamental prescriptions for a long, healthy, and productive life is to strengthen your capacity to be with all that is, just as the Buddha taught, without resistance, without identification, without following after, to be with it. That's crucially important, while also cultivating the wholesome, the positive insight, sila, samadhi, and panya, the cultivation of these beautiful things. It's your best odds strategy in a wacky world.
Rick, thank you. We'll move on to Zoom. If people want to keep asking some questions, Rick will be joining us on Zoom, and I just pasted the link into the chat as well. And Rick, I think it was Freud who said in The Interpretation of Dreams that the best I can do is change your neurotic misery into normal human unhappiness. And thank you for pushing the field of psychology a little beyond that for all of our sake. And honestly, it's very gratifying to meet a scientist and researcher and someone so grounded in the cutting edge of this research that also holds with such care and respect the tradition that we've given our lives to. And please visit us if you come to Seattle. We would love to have you.
It'd be an honor and a delight. Yeah, and Freud was pretty great. And come on, Sigmund. Dream bigger dreams, bro. Okay. I'll see you on the other side. So I click some link and then I'll